Harry's son wouldn't stop screaming, and every furious passenger was seconds from exploding, when a ragged little boy stepped into first class and placed his hand on the Mafia boss's baby. The crying stopped instantly, and every head snapped toward the child who should have run from danger, not walk into it. But the real question hit Harry like a blade. How did this unknown boy calm a child no one else could? And why did his touch feel like more than a coincidence? Something was wrong, and the answer was about to rip open the entire plane. Harry had survived interrogations, ambushes, and the death of men who once called him brother. He had stared down guns without flinching. But this tiny human in his arms, this red-faced, furious baby, was undoing him completely. He tried everything. Rocking, pacing, whispering, feeding. He even played soft static from a white noise app one of the attendants handed him. Nothing soothed David. The passengers around him were more volatile than any rival Mafia family. A man in an expensive suit muttered curses under his breath. A woman covered in diamonds pressed her call button 3 times in 8 minutes. Someone farther back grumbled, "Who brings a baby into first class?" Harry ignored them. He had to. If he acknowledged the anger in the cabin, he might lose control, and the last thing he could afford was drawing attention. Not when he was fleeing under a false identity with a target on his back. David shrieked louder, and Harry's chest tightened in frustration he wasn't used to admitting he felt. He knew how to end a man quietly. He knew how to move an empire in the shadows. But calming a baby? He felt helpless, clumsy, painfully human. If you've ever been judged for something you couldn't control, hit the subscribe button and drop a hearth. Just when the passengers' complaints grew sharp enough to cut through the air, something unexpected happened. The curtain separating first class from economy rustled. A small boy stepped through. He couldn't have been older than 10. His clothes were faded, too big for his thin frame. One sneaker was torn at the heel. He clutched a frayed backpack so tightly the straps dug into his shoulders. Yet his eyes, clear, calm, and strangely steady, held none of the annoyance or fear everyone else wore. The boy walked up to Harry as if approaching dangerous men was something he'd practiced his whole life. He stopped in front of him, swallowed once, then lifted both hands slightly toward the screaming baby. "Sir," he said softly, I think I can help." The entire cabin went silent. Even David hiccuped mid-cry. No one approached Harry Cameron without permission. No one. But exhaustion stripped Harry of the instinct to snarl or threaten. Instead, he looked at the boy. Really looked, and something in those steady eyes made him nod. The boy stepped closer, placed one small palm on David's back, hummed a low, shaky tune. David's scream cut off instantly. Silence, thick, shocking silence, fell across the cabin. Harry stared, stunned into stillness. David breathed evenly, blinking up at the boy with big, curious eyes. "How?" Harry whispered. "How did you do that?" The boy shrugged gently. "My baby cousin cried a lot. I sort of had to figure things out." The boy said it casually, but Harry didn't miss the truth hiding beneath it. Responsibility far too heavy for someone his age. He noticed the calmness in the boy's touch, the practiced movements, the familiarity of someone who had soothed crying infants because no adult was there to do it. "What's your name?" Harry murmured. The boy hesitated, hugging his backpack tighter. "Colin." Colin a slop. Harry didn't know it yet, but the moment Colin stepped forward, the course of both their lives shifted. This boy with worn-out shoes and soft hands had just done the impossible, and unknowingly pulled himself into the orbit of a man whose world was lined with violence and shadows. David's small head rested peacefully against the boy's chest, and for the first time in 3 hours, Harry exhaled. But calm was a fragile luxury. Underneath the relief, the truth scraped at Harry's thoughts. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not under this name. Not with his son so exposed. And certainly not with rival eyes already hunting him across oceans. The plane hummed steadily through the clouds, but danger was already waiting on the ground. Sharper, closer, hungrier than ever. Colin didn't move for a long moment after David settled, as if afraid that even a breath might undo the fragile miracle he had created. His small hand remained on David's back, fingers barely pressing, tracing slow circles with the steady certainty of someone who'd done this 100 times before. The melody he hummed was soft, almost trembling, but it carried a warmth, an old familiarity, like something inherited rather than learned. Harry recognized lullabies from his own childhood, those whispered by mothers who worked too late and grandmothers who loved too fiercely. But this tune, this one felt older, deeper. David's eyes fluttered once, twice, then closed completely. Silence poured through the cabin like a blessing. It was the kind of silence that made people gasp, the kind that made disbelievers stare. A woman across the aisle pressed a hand to her chest. Another passenger whispered, "Impossible." A man in the last row of first class began to clap quietly, slow, hesitant, but grateful. And soon a few others joined, their applause gentle and almost reverent. Harry felt all of it, every stare, every shifted breath, but none of it mattered compared to the small boy holding his son like he'd been born to protect him. Colin didn't bask in the attention. He didn't look up or smile proudly. He simply continued humming until David was fully asleep, as if the world around him didn't exist. And that, more than anything, made something twist inside Harry's chest. When Colin finally lifted his hand, David made a soft, contented noise and burrowed deeper into the blanket. The boy stepped back slowly, almost shyly, wiping his palms on his worn jeans as if afraid he'd crossed some invisible boundary. Harry leaned forward. "How did you do that?" Colin's gaze dropped. His fingers tightened on the frayed strap of his backpack. "I just learned," he murmured. "My baby cousin cried a lot. Nobody else could calm him, so I had to." "You had to?" Harry asked quietly. Colin nodded once. "My mom, she wasn't home much. She worked nights. And my cousin's mom, she left. So I just took care of him." The boy said it like a fact. Not a burden. Not a tragedy. Just life as he knew it. Harry studied him more closely now, really looked. The frayed hem on his sleeves. The too big sneakers. The way his shoulders curved inward, as if they had spent years trying to shrink from the world. Yet his hands were steady, skilled, older than his 10 years. "Where's your mother now?" Harry asked. Colin hesitated. The answer cost him something. "She got taken away 3 days ago." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "She did some things she shouldn't have, I guess." Harry recognized the tone. The quiet shame that didn't belong to the child. The guilt inherited from adults who failed him. "Are you traveling with anyone?" Harry asked. Another small shake of the head. "No. A lady from the shelter bought me the ticket. Said I was going to stay with relatives. But I never met them." That did something to Harry. Something sharp and unwelcome. A flash of his own childhood, sleeping under staircases, stealing scraps, learning the world through bruises. A boy survived because no one bothered to save him. He forced down the memory and turned his attention back to Colin. "You calmed my son," he said, voice low. Just like that. Colin finally lifted his eyes. There was no pride in them. Only relief that he had been useful, that he hadn't done something wrong. "I just didn't want him to hurt," Colin said softly. "Babies cry when nobody listens." Harry inhaled slowly, because in that single sentence, he heard something else, a child speaking from experience. Around them, the cabin began to settle. Passengers returned to their drinks, their screens, their conversations. But a few continued stealing glances. Grateful, curious, stunned by the small boy who had accomplished what the feared steel wolf could not. Harry shifted David carefully in his arms. The baby didn't even stir. And Colin watched the movement with quiet longing. Longing Harry recognized all too well. "You're traveling alone," Harry murmured. Colin nodded. "And you're not scared." A small shrug. "Not scared of flying. Not scared of helping a baby." Harry tilted his head. "But scared of everything else." Colin didn't answer. He didn't need to. Harry leaned back in his seat, studying the boy, This small, worn, brave child who had just stepped into the shadow of a man he should have run from. A child who knew how to soothe pain because he had carried too much of it himself. A reflection of who Harry had once been. A reminder of who he could have become if life had thrown him a single act of kindness when he needed it. David slept on, peaceful and warm in Harry's arms. Colin stood there with his frayed backpack, unsure if he should stay or return to economy. "Thank you," Harry said quietly. Words he hadn't spoken with sincerity in years. Colin blinked, startled by the softness in his voice. "You're welcome, sir." As Colin turned to walk back toward the curtain, Harry watched him go with something heavy and new tightening in his chest. He had seen many boys break under the world. Very few survived with gentleness intact. This one had. And Harry knew, without understanding why, that their paths were not crossing by accident. If this moment moved you, hit like, it helps us keep telling powerful stories like this. Harry's gaze lingered on Colin's small frame until he disappeared behind the curtain. And long after the boy vanished, something inside Harry refused to settle. He had seen the reflection of a child forced to survive alone. And he wasn't sure he could let that reflection walk away. Colin slipped back through the curtain into economy, disappearing into the narrow rows and cramped seats. But Harry's eyes stayed fixed on the spot where the boy had been, his thoughts tightening like a fist around something he hadn't felt in years. Unease, protectiveness, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of guilt. David slept soundly against his chest, small breaths puffing against Harry's shirt. The miracle shouldn't have been possible. Not here. Not today. Not while Harry Cameron, the Steel Wolf, was running for his life with his infant son and a forged identity tucked into his passport sleeve. He looked out the window, watching the clouds swallow the last rays of sun. He wasn't flying to London for business meetings, diplomatic negotiations, or criminal settlements. He was fleeing. 3 days ago, his safe house, a fortress hidden behind false walls and encrypted security systems, had been breached. Not by amateurs. Not by opportunists. But by the one syndicate bold enough to challenge him. The Verano family. They'd found him. Worse, they'd found David. Which meant the clock had stopped ticking. Which meant he had to vanish. Harry exhaled slowly. The forged documents in his breast pocket felt heavier than lead. Mr. Harold Crane. A laughable alias. He hated the name. But it was the only way to get David out of the country alive. Everything he owned, everything he built, every loyal soldier he'd buried or bled for, all of it meant nothing in this moment. He was just a father clutching his sleeping child, hoping their enemies didn't catch up mid-air. And then Colin appeared. A boy with nothing. A boy traveling alone. A boy whose steady hands had done what decades of violence never could. Quieted the storm in Harry's chest. Harry shifted slightly, adjusting David's blanket. He couldn't focus on the boy. He needed to stay alert, watchful. One miscalculation could put both him and David in a body bag before sunrise. But the boy lingered in his mind anyway. Alone. Afraid. Sent away like unwanted cargo. The plane hit a patch of turbulence. David stirred but didn't wake. Harry glanced again at the curtain separating first class and economy. The thin line dividing two worlds. One soaked in luxury. The other soaked in quiet suffering. Colin sat with his arms wrapped tightly around his backpack, staring down at the floor. His shoes didn't touch it. They dangled just above. His seat neighbor, a middle-aged woman who had earlier complained about his restless tapping, now smiled at him like he was a celebrity. "You're the boy who helped with the baby," she whispered brightly. Colin nodded awkwardly, trying to make himself smaller. He didn't know how to handle kindness from strangers. He didn't know how to handle attention at all. A man leaned across the aisle. "Smart kid. Bet your parents are proud." Colin's throat tightened. "My mom's not, she's not here." The woman blinked, her smile faltering. "Oh, I'm sure you'll see her soon." "I won't," Colin whispered. She didn't ask more. Most adults never did. He squeezed his backpack. Inside were the only things he owned: 2 shirts, a cracked tablet, and a photo of him with his mother. She was smiling in the picture, a rare moment captured before life broke her in ways Colin didn't understand. He took a shaky breath. 3 days ago, he'd watched her get handcuffed and taken away. The next morning, a woman from the shelter said he had to go. New family, she'd said. A fresh start. But Colin could see the truth behind her eyes. No one wanted him there. He was a burden, an extra mouth, a small problem to ship off quietly. And now he was flying to relatives he had never met. Strangers. People who didn't even call to ask about him. Alone. His chest tightened. He wished he were invisible again. Being useful was scary. Because it made people look at him. Up front, Harry tried to force himself to focus on the flight attendants passing by. But his eyes kept drifting again and again toward the curtain. The attendants were whispering in the galley, checking lists, glancing occasionally toward economy. One of them, the younger brunette, looked anxious. Harry saw her approach Colin's seat. He couldn't hear the words, but he recognized the posture. The question. The suspicion. Colin straightened in his seat, hands squeezing the backpack straps. The attendant frowned. She asked something sternly. Colin shook his head quickly, fear rising in his eyes. She stepped away with a concerned look. Harry's jaw tightened. He knew that look. The look adults gave a child who didn't belong, who didn't have the right paperwork, who didn't have anyone claiming him. The kind of look Harry remembered from his own childhood. The look that decided whether someone would help or discard you. His pulse sharpened. A dangerous heat built beneath his skin, simmering in the place where rage lived. How dare they intimidate him? How dare they question him like he was a problem? Harry wasn't even standing, yet the violence in his blood felt close to the surface, ready to bare its teeth. He whispered to himself, "Breathe." But he didn't. The curtain swished open. Colin stood there again, looking small and lost, uncertainty written across his face. He didn't move closer, just hovered like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be seen. Harry lifted a hand. "Come here." The boy hesitated only a second before stepping into first class again. He looked up at Harry with those wide, quiet eyes, the eyes of a child who had never asked the world for anything and received less than that in return. "Is something wrong?" Harry asked, voice low, controlled. Colin shook his head, but his hands trembled. They wanted to know who I'm with," he murmured. "I told them I'm alone. They said they needed to make sure my paperwork's correct." Harry's stomach twisted. "They scared you," he said softly. Colin didn't answer, but his silence screamed yes. Harry inhaled deeply. A world that abandons a child like this deserves to burn. And for the first time in years, Harry felt something he thought he'd lost. Purpose. Not for revenge, not for power, but for protection. The kind only a father, or a guardian, could possess. And he wasn't letting Colin out of his sight again. Harry watched the boy standing beside him, clutching that little frayed backpack as if the fabric itself was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. The cabin lights dimmed into a soft twilight glow, and David's quiet breathing rose and fell against Harry's chest. For a moment everything felt still. Too familiar. "Sit," Harry murmured. Colin slid into the empty seat beside him, shoulders curled inward, eyes avoiding the attention of the first-class passengers who continued to sneak curious glances. He looked small in the wide plush seat, too small to be carrying the weight he clearly held inside. Harry didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. His mind had already drifted backward, into the memories he tried to bury beneath years of violence, blood, and power. He saw a thin boy hiding beneath a staircase, knees pulled to his chest, counting the cracks in the concrete so he wouldn't hear his father shouting. He smelled the damp alley where he slept sometimes, because it was safer than the house. He remembered stealing bread from a market stall and running until his lungs burned. Abandoned. Forgotten. A ghost in a world that refused to see the hungry, dirty children roaming its edges. Harry had learned early that people didn't help boys like him. They stepped over them, ignored them, used them, and eventually, he became something the world couldn't ignore. The first time he was handed a knife, he was 13. The first time he used it, he was 14. By 15, he had a reputation. By 17, He was already being groomed to take over operations. Violence wasn't a choice. It was the language the world forced into his mouth. The Steel Wolf. That's what they called him. Not because he was strong, but because he had learned to survive by tearing his way through anything that tried to cage him. A child built into a weapon. Now, staring at Colin, small, trembling, holding his entire life in a faded backpack, Harry felt something twist deeply inside his chest. He wasn't looking at a stranger. He was looking at himself. In his life, he barely escaped. Colin turned his head slowly, voice barely above a breath. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Harry said quietly. Colin swallowed hard. "I just didn't know where to go." "You did nothing wrong." Harry kept his tone controlled, gentle. Strange even to his own ears. "You came here because you felt scared." Colin nodded once. And that's when Harry saw it, the flicker of fear he recognized from 1,000 broken children in his past. The kind of fear that didn't come from disobedience or mischief. It came from years of being unwanted. "Tell me," Harry said, "why are you scared of the people you're going to?" Colin hesitated. His fingers tightened around the backpack strap again, knuckles white. They don't want me," he whispered. Harry's jaw clenched. "They never visited. Not even when my mom got arrested. The lady at the shelter said they agreed to take me because family should stay together. But," his voice cracked, "they didn't even call me. Not once." He took a shaky breath. I think I'm just going to be a burden." Harry felt the words like a punch, because he remembered saying something similar once, to a man who used to beat him for breathing too loudly. Colin continued, barely audible. "And I don't want to go somewhere people don't want me. I tried telling the lady at the shelter, but she said I didn't have a choice." He blinked rapidly, eyes shining. "I'm just supposed to show up and hope they let me stay." He squeezed his backpack even tighter. "This is all I have," he whispered. "Everything I own is in here." Harry inhaled slowly through his nose, steadying the storm rising inside him. This wasn't just a boy traveling alone. This was a boy the world had already written off. Discarded. Shipped out like extra baggage. Harry looked down at David, sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the shadows that haunted the boy beside him. Then he looked at Colin, really looked, and something ancient and wounded shifted inside him. A vow made itself in his blood before his mind even formed the words. "No one will abandon this child again. Not while I breathe." Colin glanced up, eyes wide. "Should I go back now?" Harry shook his head slowly. "No. Stay here for a while." Colin nodded, relief softening his shoulders. He leaned back, hugging his backpack to his chest like a shield. The cabin felt warmer somehow, quieter. David slept on. Harry stared at the boy beside him, a boy carved from survival, from silence, from the same kind of pain that once forged a monster out of him. If you believe every child deserves protection, subscribe. You're among friends here. Harry looked forward again, jaw tight, heart heavy. A child like this deserved love, safety, a future. Not another closed door. Not another cold stranger. Not another world willing to throw him away. As the plane hummed steadily through the night sky, Harry Cameron, the Steel Wolf, made a silent promise. This child will never be discarded again. The cabin had settled into a strange, gentle quiet, one that felt borrowed, fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. David slept soundly now, not in Harry's arms but curled against Colin's small chest, his tiny fingers gripping the boy's shirt. Colin held him with surprising confidence, one hand cupped protectively over the baby's back. For the first time since takeoff, Harry let himself breathe. But beneath the surface of that calm, something darker moved. Harry felt it before he saw it, a prickling at the base of his neck, the instinct honed from surviving too many betrayals to count. The same instinct that had kept him alive long enough to become the Steel Wolf. He scanned the cabin. Passengers pretended to sleep. Some watched movies. A few attendants whispered in the galley. Everything looked normal. Except for one man. Seat 4A. The man sat angled slightly toward them, too casual, too relaxed, flipping through a magazine without looking at the pages. But his eyes kept drifting up, a fraction too often. Not toward Harry's face, but toward his hands. Toward David. Harry's blood chilled. He's watching the baby, Harry realized. Not me. The baby. A professional would go for the leverage. David was the leverage. If Colin hadn't stepped in earlier, if Harry had still been pacing the aisles, rocking a screaming infant, he would have been vulnerable. Off guard. Moving. Predictable. But instead he had been still. Alert. Upright. And that, apparently, had made the assassin reconsider. Harry shifted subtly in his seat, adjusting his posture just enough to get a clearer view of the man. No ring indentation on the finger, so not married. Calloused hands. Military or mercenary background. Shoes too clean for a long-haul flight. Someone who planned to move fast after landing. A tail without question. Harry's jaw tightened. The Verano Syndicate was bold, but not stupid. They wouldn't risk a public attempt unless they were certain his guard was down. Except he wasn't. Not tonight. Not with Colin unexpectedly anchoring him to that seat. The irony sliced through him like a blade. A poor little boy's act of kindness had just derailed a professional hit. He leaned back, disguising his tension with the bored body language of a wealthy traveler. But inside, every inch of him was coiled, watching for the smallest twitch of a threat. Colin didn't notice any of it. His entire world in that moment was the tiny sleeping baby in his lap. He stroked David's hair gently, humming under his breath. It wasn't the same lullaby from before, just a soft, aimless tune, like something made up on the spot. Harry watched the two of them. David looked peaceful. Colin looked content. A small, real smile tugged at the boy's mouth, a smile Harry hadn't seen before. And then Colin whispered, barely audible, "He's warm." Harry blinked. What? Colin didn't look up. "He's warm, and he trusts me." Harry said nothing, but the words hit harder than they should have. Trust wasn't a word he associated with infants or children. It wasn't a word he associated with anyone. Colin continued, voice soft and dreamy, as if speaking not to Harry but to himself. "I haven't held a baby since my cousin got taken away." His arms tightened instinctively around David, like he was afraid someone might snatch the baby from him too. Harry felt something twist inside him, a sharp, protective ache he had no name for. "Do you miss him?" Harry asked quietly. Colin nodded. "Yeah, a lot. But this." He looked down at David's peaceful face. "This feels nice. Safe." Harry studied him. That word, safe, echoed in places Harry hadn't touched in years. This boy had lived his entire life on edges and cold floorboards and crowded shelters. Safety wasn't a feeling he knew. Until now. Harry swallowed, watching how naturally Colin held his son. As if the child belonged there. As if the universe had placed the two broken pieces together to make something whole. But the man in seat 4A shifted. Harry saw it instantly. Subtle. Calculated. The kind of movement a killer made when recalculating risk. Harry's hand twitched toward the knife hidden in his boot, disguised as part of his luggage locks. His bodyguards weren't here. His men weren't waiting outside the cockpit. Harry was alone. Except, he didn't feel alone. He looked at Colin. The boy was just a child. Fragile. Young. And yet, somehow, Harry felt steadier with him sitting there. Like the quiet presence of this small stranger grounded him in a way even hardened soldiers never had. Colin shifted slightly, adjusting David in his arms. The baby curled closer. Colin smiled softly. And for a moment, just a moment, the darkness in Harry's chest cracked open. He wasn't just protecting his son. He was protecting this boy too. Because something in Colin's eyes reminded him of every scar he carried. Every night he slept alone. Every time he had been told he didn't belong. Every fear he had swallowed until it turned into violence. Colin Aslop wasn't brave because he was fearless. He was brave because he was used to surviving anyway. Harry exhaled slowly, letting the truth settle like gravel in his bones. This boy wasn't a stranger. Not anymore. The man in seat 4 shifted again, this time closing his magazine and pretending to sleep. A professional fallback. Abort mission. Try again later. Harry's gaze hardened. He knew exactly why the assassin backed off. A sleeping infant in a man's arms was a vulnerable target. A sleeping infant in the arms of a calm boy beside a fully alert father? Too high risk. Too many variables. Colin had saved them both. Again. Harry let the tension drain from his shoulders, just enough to look relaxed. Colin looked up suddenly, noticing Harry's stare. Did I do something wrong? Harry shook his head. No, Colin. You did something very right. The boy blinked, confused. Harry didn't elaborate. Not yet. But inside his chest, a realization settled like thunder. This boy saved my son. And maybe my life. The plane's wheels screeched against the tarmac, jolting passengers in their seats. The hum of the engines faded into the roar of London's early morning traffic. Harry's gaze didn't waver from Colin, now snug against his chest, yawning but alert, eyes wide at the endless sea of strangers pouring down the jetway. David's hand was already gripping the handle of his suitcase, scanning the crowd with the cautious vigilance that had become second nature. Stay close, Harry murmured, his voice low, calm, a grounding presence in the chaos of disembarking passengers. Colin blinked at him, uncertain. The airport smelled strange, like polished floors, coffee, and something sharp in the air. He didn't want to leave Harry's side. Harry adjusted his coat, checking that his concealed firearm rested comfortably against his ribs. He had one objective: get Colin safely to his relatives, and then figure out why the kid's father, or whoever had sent him, wasn't here to meet him. But instinct told him that the streets of London were far from safe, especially for a boy like Colin. As they stepped into the arrivals hall, the first flicker of danger revealed itself. From the far end of the terminal, the polished floor reflected the glint of metal. Armed men moved with precise coordination, eyes cold and calculating. Panic rippled instantly through the crowd as their presence became clear. Shouts, luggage clattering, heels pounding against tile. Colin froze, his small hands clutching his backpack straps so tightly his knuckles went white. His face went pale as the crowd scattered around him. He didn't move, paralyzed by fear. Colin. Harry barked, stooping to the boy's level. Stay with me. Do you understand? The child nodded weakly, lips trembling. David's eyes narrowed, fists clenched, but he remained a step behind Harry. He had learned long ago that in situations like this, rushing in without a plan could mean instant death. Harry's mind raced. The exits were chaos. Security was already scrambling to respond, but it wouldn't be enough. These men weren't here for a random mugging. Their movements were too precise, too deliberate. A gunshot cracked. The terminal erupted into screams. Harry reacted without hesitation. He shoved Colin behind him, pulling David close. His body became a shield, a living barrier against the unknown bullets flying too close for comfort. Each bang against the floor and walls made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Colin whimpered, clinging to Harry's coat, eyes wide and tearful. I don't want to die, he whispered. Harry's jaw tightened. He wasn't going to let that happen. Not on his watch. Not to this kid. Not ever. Stay low. Harry ordered, pivoting slightly to block the line of sight, keeping his back to the boy. Bullets ricocheted, pinging off metal and glass. The men were closing in, and yet every instinct Harry had honed over decades screamed for patience, precision, control. He could have run. Could have vanished into the crowds, leaving David and Colin to fend for themselves until backup arrived. Every survival instinct in him screamed to prioritize himself. And yet, Harry didn't move. Not an inch. Instead, he raised his body slightly, positioning himself so that Colin and David were fully protected. He caught a glimpse of the nearest attacker's eyes, and felt the weight of every second. Then, with calm ferocity, he shoved David and Colin further behind, creating a buffer. Move! He yelled, voice slicing through the chaos. Now! David! hesitating only for a heartbeat, followed. Colin clutched his backpack tighter, a tiny anchor in the storm of fear. Shots rang again, closer this time. Harry growled, low and dangerous, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the terminal. He wasn't just defending. He was warning, asserting, marking the boundary no one dared cross. "You hear me?" he spat, voice thick with lethal promise. "No one touches this boy. He's under my protection now." The attackers faltered, just for a second. Enough for Harry's men, positioned strategically along the terminal, to move in. The tide of the ambush began to shift, bullets slowing as trained backup met the intruders head-on. Colin peeked out from behind Harry's coat. His eyes, wide with terror, flickered with a hint of awe. He didn't understand the full gravity of what had just happened. All he knew was that the man in front of him, this stranger who smelled faintly of leather and danger, had risked everything to keep him safe. And in that moment, despite the screaming, despite the chaos, despite the blood and fear, a silent promise was forged. Harry stood firm, chest rising and falling rapidly, muscles taut. The attackers were retreating, regrouping, or reconsidering. Either way, Harry had made it clear. This was no ordinary child. This was someone under his protection. And he would die before anyone hurt him. David crouched beside him, still tense but relieved. You didn't have to." Harry's glare softened only slightly, eyes sweeping the hall. "He's not yours to protect. He's mine now." Colin blinked up at him, uncertain, exhausted, but safe, at least for now. And Harry's growl carried across the terminal, final and unyielding. A warning. A declaration. A promise. "No one touches this boy. He's under my protection now." The taxi wound through London's grey streets, rain pattering against the windows like nervous fingers. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by Colin's occasional sniffle and the faint whimper of baby David nestled in his arms. Harry's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, alert to every passing car, every shadow lurking in alleyways. The attack at the airport had been a warning, not an isolated event. And now, the full weight of the situation pressed down on all three of them. They arrived at a nondescript building, its exterior plain and unremarkable, like every other structure in the sprawling city. Inside, though, the atmosphere was different. Calm, secure, and organized. A pair of Harry's men moved efficiently, ushering them into a private room. "Sit," Harry instructed, gesturing toward a leather couch. Colin perched cautiously on the edge, David still cradled in his small hands. The child's tiny grip was tighter than Harry expected, a reflection of the chaos they'd just survived. Harry's eyes softened, just enough to be noticed. "Colin, you're safe here. For now." Colin's voice barely rose above a whisper. I don't understand. Why are they trying to hurt me?" Harry ran a hand through his hair, sighing. Explaining the truth to a child was never easy, especially a truth like this. He lowered himself into the chair across from Colin, his gaze steady. "You saved a life today," he began carefully. "Not just any life. The life of someone very important. Someone powerful." Colin's eyes widened, confusion and fear swirling together. "Powerful like?" Harry's lips tightened. "I'm someone who makes enemies. Dangerous enemies. And because you were in the wrong place at the right time, you became part of this world, whether you wanted to or not." The weight of the words settled over Colin. He glanced down at baby David, heart hammering. The soft, innocent face of the child he had just helped calm seemed impossibly fragile. And yet, he had done it. He had been brave. I saved him." Colin's voice cracked. Harry nodded once. "Yes, you did. And because of that, you're in danger now. But you also have my protection. That's a promise." Colin swallowed hard. The idea that a stranger, a man who smelled faintly of leather and danger, had just declared himself his protector was almost too much to grasp. His life had changed in the blink of an eye. Everything familiar, school, home, his safe little routines, was gone. Harry noticed the tremor in Colin's hands. He had never spoken like this to anyone, let alone a child. And yet now, something compelled him to offer reassurance. "I know you're scared," he said gently, his voice lower, softer than Colin had ever heard. "It's okay to be scared. But you're not alone anymore. Not while I'm here." Colin's breath hitched, a small tear tracing down his cheek. Harry handed him a clean handkerchief, something else he had never done. Show care without expectation, without manipulation. David stirred in Colin's lap, tiny fists waving. Colin instinctively rocked the baby, murmuring softly. To Harry's surprise, David immediately quieted, letting himself be held only by Colin. Harry leaned back, watching the subtle bond form. Colin's face softened, the tension easing just enough for a hint of pride to shine through. He had saved a life and now was trusted to protect another. "You've got a gift, Colin," Harry said quietly. "Not many kids can do what you just did. You have a courage most people can't even imagine." Colin glanced up, eyes wide. I just wanted him to be okay." "That's all that matters," Harry replied. For a moment, the weight of his world, the contracts, the threats, the enemies waiting in the shadows, lifted slightly. Here, in this small room, a child had shown him something rare. Uncalculated, pure bravery. Hours passed in quiet. Colin fed and soothed David, talking softly when the baby fussed, and Harry remained close, observing, sometimes offering a word of guidance. The walls were secure, the world outside temporarily held at bay, but Harry's mind couldn't stop turning over the thought that had begun the moment Colin held David. Fate, or something very like it. He hadn't asked for a child to appear in his life, and yet, here he was, standing guard over one. Not as a mob boss, not as a man with enemies on every side, but as something unfamiliar, a protector, a guardian. Colin finally leaned back on the couch, baby David cradled against his chest, eyelids heavy with sleep. "I think I can do this," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Harry allowed a small nod, his eyes narrowing slightly in thought. He had no idea where this path would lead, what dangers still lurked in the shadows of London, but one thing had become very clear. Colin was no ordinary child. And perhaps, just perhaps, he had been sent to Harry for a reason. The room was quiet, except for the soft rhythm of a child breathing in sleep. And for the first time in a long while, Harry allowed himself a sliver of something he didn't often feel: hope. The rain had stopped, leaving slick streets that gleamed under London streetlights. Harry's safe house was quiet, almost deceptively so. Colin sat by the window, baby David in his arms, rocking him gently. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the streets, a habit born of survival, of being small in a world full of danger. It was Colin who first noticed the dark sedan creeping along the corner, engine low and tires whispering against the wet pavement. Something about the angle, the hesitation, the way the driver's hands gripped the wheel, it didn't feel right. "Harry," he said softly, but firmly, tapping the shoulder of the nearest bodyguard. "That car. It's following the wrong pattern. I think they're coming for us." The men froze for a heartbeat, then moved into action with trained precision. Harry appeared in the doorway, expression calm but lethal. He caught Colin's eye and nodded, silent acknowledgement of the boy's instinct. Minutes later, the bodyguards intercepted the would-be attackers outside the perimeter. The ambush collapsed before it began. Colin's heart raced, but he felt a strange, quiet pride. He had done it again, not with strength, but with observation, wit, and courage. Harry came to the window, standing behind Colin and David. "You've got a knack for noticing what others miss," he said, voice low. "You saved us again, kid." Colin shrank a little under the praise. "I just didn't want him hurt." He nodded at David, who cooed softly, tiny fists stretching. Harry's gaze softened for just a fraction of a second, something rare and human breaking through the hard exterior of the Mafia kingpin. Then the resolve hardened again. Good. Because it's not over yet. Night descended fully over London, shadows growing longer, heavier. Harry moved swiftly, leading Colin and David to a reinforced vehicle. Every step was calculated, every glance measured. The syndicate thought they could strike. They didn't know the man they were up against. The final confrontation was inevitable. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, dimly lit and echoing with the hum of tension, became the stage. Syndicate men emerged, weapons drawn, faces hard, eyes filled with greed and fear. Harry's presence was commanding, a predator in the spotlight. His men flanked him, but he stepped forward alone, making it clear. This was personal. "You came for a child," Harry said, voice low and lethal. "You will leave knowing why that was a mistake." Bullets flew, echoing against metal beams. Men fell, some scrambling, some caught unprepared. Harry moved with controlled ferocity, each motion precise, brutal, and deadly. Colin clutched David against his chest from the reinforced car nearby, watching his unlikely guardian dispatch the threat with efficiency honed over years of blood and strategy. And yet, as the dust settled and the last of the syndicate crawled away, defeated and broken, Colin realized something extraordinary. He had survived. He had watched, noticed, and warned the right people. Without him, even Harry might have been at risk. His instincts had mattered. His voice had mattered. When the warehouse finally fell silent, Harry approached the car, crouching beside Colin. David wriggled slightly, sensing the shift, but Colin held him steady. "You did well," Harry said, a rare, quiet intensity in his voice. "Brave. Smart. Strong, in ways most adults couldn't manage." Colin looked down, heart pounding. I just wanted to help. I didn't want anyone to get hurt." Harry's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, firm but gentle. "That's exactly why you're here, Colin. And from now on, you're mine. You stay close, you learn, you survive. I'll protect you. You'll have a place. A family. And if anyone ever tries to touch you again—" His voice hardened, deadly promises ringing through the night. "They won't live to regret it." Colin blinked, absorbing the weight of the words. The fear of abandonment, the terror of danger, the uncertainty that had haunted him for so long, all of it began to fade, replaced by something unfamiliar. Belonging. "Really?" he whispered. Will I stay?" Harry's rare smile was slight, but genuine. "You're not going anywhere. Ever. You saved my child. You've proven yourself. And now, you're part of this family. Chosen. Forever." Colin looked at David, who gurgled softly and reached for him. The warmth of connection, of trust, wrapped around him like a shield stronger than any steel. He had found his place. His protector, his family, his home. Harry rose, glancing once more at the ruined syndicate remnants, then back at Colin. "Your life just changed, kid. Danger and all. But you won't face it alone. Not ever." Colin nodded, gripping David tighter, the last remnants of fear melting into courage. He was no longer just a child who had stumbled into a Mafia world. He was someone who mattered. Someone who had made a difference. Someone bound by fate, and now by choice, to the man who had saved him and whom he had helped protect in return. In that moment, under the dim lights of the warehouse, the rain-slick streets of London outside, and the quiet breathing of a baby in his arms, Colin understood fully. He had become the unthinkable hero. A Mafia boss. A boy who had saved a baby. Destinies intertwined forever.